Hi, this is Sean, and in this lesson we're going to learn something I'm really passionate about. Why I use chord numbers as well as chord names that you're used to seeing, what it really does for you, where people miss the point, and how it skyrockets your jazz fluency if you use them the right way. Please do hit like on this video, it helps YouTube to spread it to more people who may be interested, and if it's your first time here, please do hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you know when I upload new content. And with that, I'm ready to begin. So first of all, why chord numbers? Do we now just have to memorize even more stuff? You know, struggling enough to memorize chord names and tunes, and now we've got to remember this as well, and this is just an extra layer. It's nothing like that. This is what freed me up and actually got me to get through standards in a way that I knew what I was playing and I could do something with them, okay? So a little bit about my story with chord numbers. Well, my first teacher, Leon, used to write out tunes with nothing but chord numbers. So if you wanted to play Blue Moon, it wouldn't say C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7 to C. It would say 1, 6, 2, 5, 1, etc. You know, so we had to learn it that way. And it was a very beneficial way to do it because suddenly the context and the common chord progressions would come to light. That's one thing. But also, when I would accompany the Barry Harris Singers workshops, it was really tough in the early days. It was hell. I'll never forget the first time I was made to do it. There was a jazz standard that I'd never heard of before. There was a lead sheet with mistakes on it, and he wanted it in 8 keys. That's when I realized I didn't know the functions in standards as well as I thought I did. But that's not the point for you. You might be thinking, yeah, but I'm never going to do that. That just illustrated to me how much it could free me up. And what was interesting was I would go to the piano class and I did okay. I'd go to the improv class, I did okay. But in the singers class where I expected to learn nothing is where I really honed my craft and started to get fluency and learn to play within the band, to support, learned what the real functions of the chord progressions in tunes were because I had to look at them in other keys as well. Okay. So why I use them is, that's one reason, because of those workshops actually, I would, if I saw the lead sheet coming up for a tune we were about to play, I would quickly go and write the chord numbers on there, and that would help me in the early days. And then I got to the stage where I didn't really need to do that anymore, was able to think of both the chord numbers and the chords at the same time. Context, as I said. So in the key of C, F major is just F major. That doesn't tell me anything. Let's imagine we don't know we're even in the key of C. Somebody just says F major. It means nothing. I mean, we could be in the key of F, we could be in the key of C, it could just be a chord. But in C, it tells me that this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth chord in the key of F. And that tells me where we probably just came from. There are several ways to get to 4, so some common ones, 1, 2, 3 to 4. Another one would be the 2, 5 that leads to 4. So we could have a G minor 7, because that's 2 in F, C7, to get to F major 7, even if we're in the key of C and those other chords come from the key of F, because we'll borrow things from the key of F to lead to an F major 7 chord, even when it's in the key of C. So can you see how, I don't expect if you're new for you to understand all these things right now, but can you see where it leads linguistically? So what I retain is the story of a tune. The same way, Londoners, if you're going to walk from Oxford Street to Covent Garden, there are several ways you can do it. And you don't have to remember every turning you're going to walk on every street, but you know the direction. And once you do the first bit, you'll remember the second bit. And then once you do the second bit, you'll be reminded, and your sense of direction will lead you. In the same way in jazz, your ears will begin to lead you. And generally, newer students, this is really for sort of level 1 and 2 students. For me, level 1, just learning the chords and getting it together. Level 2, putting tunes together, adding melodies and simple voicings. Basic improv. Level 3, full-blown movements, advanced improv, etc. Substitutions, all the whole works. But at that level, it may feel like you're never going to have ears, and people think you should do this either with your eyes or with your memory, what I call re skills, read skills or remember skills. It's just not how it's done. You have to have language skills, and they're not that hard to get together. So every tune has a story, and Secrets is trying to show you about how it's got stuff that's in common with other tunes and where it's coming from and where it's going to. And if you ignore all of that and just try and memorize a sequence of events, you can't play the music because you're not playing the language in the way that the composer did. You're playing from the perspective of an audience member, really, just saying, oh, I'd love to play that. You know, a punter off the street, I'd love to play that. Let's buy the music and read some arrangement or transcription. The amount of times people email me and say, you are going to write down in a PDF every single note you play, right? No, I'm going to show you how to arrive at your own things, and I'll guide you a lot along the way, but that's not how it's done. So that's about the story that you get from it. There are only a few functions. There are things like I showed you 2 5s that land on chords in the key, and a couple of others. Let's look at one more today. Let's look at 1, 2, 3 in C, and then flat 3, and we put a diminished chord on this flat 3. So this is a diminished chord. All the notes are equidistant, equally distant. 1, 2, 3 away, 1, 2, 3 away, 1, 2, 3 away. Minor thirds apart means the same thing. And flat 3 normally leads to 2. Okay, 2 is D minor in the key of C. So now if I'm in the key of F and I wanted to do that, well, here's chord 1, chord 2, because remember F has a B flat, chord 3, chord 4, chord 5, chord 6, chord 7, and back home. So in F, 1, 2, 3, flat 3. Okay, so I've got to play a diminished chord on A flat now. And that leads to 2. Just doing that flat 3 diminished to 2, if I play it in the key of F, I can think of several tunes that do that. So for example, here's one. My Heart Stood Still. And those are all common functions as well. Smile does it. So if you take here's a flat 3 diminished, A flat diminished. All that kind of thing. How about, what's this one called? Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. So there's a 1 or a 1 with a 3 in the bass. Flat 3 diminished. Remember I said they go to 2? And every one in this case, 2 is G minor in the key of F. Every one of those tunes has gone to 2. There are some exceptions, but we study those too. So you see how we start to get a feel of the language once we know a couple of little functions. All standards, jazz standards, start to make sense. I initially did this for myself and created a little system so that I wouldn't get caught out in Barry Harris singers workshops, right? That's the truth of the matter. But next thing you know, I start to see functions on every tune, and they're all the same if we're talking about jazz standards. If we're talking about tunes after, you know, from the 60s and so forth, when a lot of rules get broken, things can change for sure. But the functions within the jazz standards, the American Songbook, every single tune conforms to a few functions. So if you're thinking functions as the music goes past, then it becomes much clearer where you're coming from, where you're going to. You can start to predict several chords ahead. You can hear those functions because if you're aware of them and numbering them as you go, you start to recognize the sound of them. So everything starts to come together. And it's exciting. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about this. So one obvious benefit would be transposing. If I had to play, let's say, that area of Smile in the key of C, I'd have a chord 1, a flat 3 diminished, a 2, and then this one goes to a 6 dominant. That's a different story. So now if I want to do it in F, 1 in F, flat 3 diminished, 2. The melody's a different story. Maybe we'll talk about that another day. But I'm mostly doing that with my ear and occasionally a little bit with eyes, right? So transposing is a pretty obvious benefit of this. However, I know a lot of people immediately say, yeah, but I'm not going to need to do that. I'm not going to be playing with singers or going to jam sessions where somebody calls a tune. It doesn't matter. By doing this, I got to know the tune in the original key better by doing it in a couple of other keys. I got to know and still get to know the progressions better by drilling one tune in a couple of keys. That's the point of doing it. You get to know the piano really well, and then you get to realize what's in common between different tunes. So in a minute, we'll look at a tune and we'll see how that has a lot of stuff in common with another tune. So you're really learning music, not a tune, by focusing on the ingredients, the jazz, that's why we call it jazz skills, the jazz skills involved, the language. Hope that's making sense. So let's take a look at what a difference a day made. Normally the key of F. Now, if we look at the last head, I normally write these out in Roman numerals to begin with. These are tracks that my students use that they can play with. And then they can play the chords, etc. They can play the chords along with those. And then they can remove me, because these come with 12 different recordings with comping with me or tracks only. They can put them in different keys, all sorts of stuff. But let's see what we have. If we look at the last head, I normally write out the straight chord numbers. Always write out the straight chord numbers, actually, so we can figure out what's going on and get practice of reading a real lead sheet as well. And then they can also look these up if they're confused about any of the numbers. So in F, G minor 7 is 1, 2. C7 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're supposed to know that before you start playing a tune in F, right? You're supposed to have drilled your chord numbers properly. And this brings me to another point, actually. I've seen so many beginners try and find a better way. I remember Leon, my first jazz piano teacher. I studied with Barry Harris, but I studied with Leon before that. I remember after a long break going to see Leon, and I remember him saying to me, you know, Sean, jazz musicians are opposed to the direct statement. Took me a little while to know what he meant. And I feel that he meant, I could just tell you, play these notes, play those notes. This is an easy name for it. This is a quick thing. That's easier. It's not better. It's not more informative. It does not inform you about what you're doing. It just tells you where to put your fingers, right? And that's really, yeah, so what? So a lot of newer players think, yeah, I've got a quicker, easier way to do that. Why don't I write on this lead sheet in another way? It drives me crazy when my students do that. Fortunately, very few do that because they're missing the real nutrition that's available, okay? So 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Typical 2, 5, 1 progression in the key of F, right? And then, oh, didn't we talk about this? It goes 1, 2, 3, flat 3 diminished, to 2, exactly as we spoke about earlier. So this is all textbook stuff so far. And by the way, another tune I can think of that goes 1, 2, 3, flat 3 diminished to 2 is My Romance, if anybody's heard or played that, but often in the key of C or B flat. So if I put this in C, My Romance begins with that. So it'll go C major, 1, 2, D minor, 3, E minor, E flat diminished, flat 3 diminished, 2, and then a 5, 1. You see, so you start to get which tunes have stuff in common, even if they're in different keys. So it no longer feels like, oh, I memorized all the chords for What a Difference a Day Made. Now I've got to memorize all the chords and all the notes for My Romance in the key of C. No, you don't. You just got to recognize what a 2-5-1 feels like and sounds like. You got to recognize what a 1, 2, 3, flat 3 diminished to 2 feels like and sounds like. And then you're playing the same stuff just in slightly different ways, okay? Because if you're not doing that, how will you improvise? Because improvisation is all about context. It's all about these functions and having tricks to use over them. So I'm not a neurologist, but I think in my brain, if I'm improvising over this tune, I suspect that in there somewhere, it's going, which tools do you have for a 2-5-1? Which tools do you have for a flat 3 diminished going to 2? And then that can be true, doesn't matter which key you're in, as long as you've learned how that key works, right? So after that, what happens? We get that 2-5-1. We've gone 2-5-1. And then we'll just do the first half of this together so you get a taste for it, right? Then we get what I call a 2-5 that goes to 6. Why? I've got a whole lesson on this that I'll link below. Because in the key of F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is D minor 7th. And when you 2-5 before a minor, 2-5s are just progressions that go and land us on places, right? You normally go minor 7 flat 5 on the 2, 1, 2. And then on the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you'll play an A7. Those of you who know your D harmonic minor scale, doesn't matter if you don't. That should really be a C sharp, but I haven't told the computer which key to put that in. The second chord of that is E minor 7 flat 5. And then the fifth chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just alternate notes to make these chords, is A7. So that's why 2-5 to D minor is E minor 7 flat 5 to A7. And then finally we get a D minor 7 to G7. There are several ways to look at this. For today, I'm just going to say it's a 6 in the key of F, going to a 2 dominant, and then we finally get a 2-5 in the key of F, and then we're on to the B section, right? So we could put all of this into Roman numerals in our heads. That's not why the word head is written up there. It means the tune. Or we can literally write it out. I get my students to follow this as they learn tunes. I'll tell you why I did that, and I'll also tell you why that's the single most valuable thing we've done in lessons for decades. Because it fused this thing that was going on. They would learn tunes and they could talk about progressions and functions, but they could only talk about that before they played a tune and analyzed and had loads of time to think about it, or after they played a tune in retrospect and had loads of time to think about it. But I realized they were not processing the progressions as they were going past, and this has got them to do that. I now have students who wouldn't have dreamt of taking a tune and putting it in different keys so they can learn how different keys work, that are doing that regularly with tons of tunes as a matter of course and improvising over them as well. And this has been the biggest thing we've done to make that happen. So this is how it would look. 2, 5, 1, 2, 3, flat 3 diminished. And it's fine if you're just playing the chords, by the way. I get them to do that first anyway. 2, 5, 1, etc. Now that 2-5 to 6 we were talking about. E minor 7 flat 5 to A7. 6, D minor 7. And then this progression that is another thing I call the long progression to the dominant. We'll maybe look at that another day. 2 dominant, G7. So if you're playing a G chord in the key of F and it's not a G minor 7 because F has a B flat and you need a G7, you say 2 dominant. Because it's a G7, a dominant chord, 2-5. And then you're back to the B section. And then there'll be a couple of parts that are a little different. That's how we learn a tune. See? So the whole point of this is to be playing the tunes. You can play the tunes and learn nothing about the language, or you can play the tunes in a way that the language starts to make sense and you're thinking of the language as it happens. I guarantee you, those people thinking, oh, this is just another layer, it's another thing to do. We do this all the time. It does work, but you have to do it for it to work. You can't just think about it. I get so many new Jazz Skills members who say things like, I know the 2-5s, I know the flat 3 diminished, the 4 minor 6, all these functions, I know about them. I know about the substitutions, I've read all the books, I've watched all the videos. Still can't play, don't have any freedom, cannot improvise. And it's because I've never met one of those people who can think and talk about, maybe even recite, the progressions whilst they're playing. And that shows then that's not what's fueling them. What's fueling them is a sequence of events they've memorized or stuff they have to read every time. It doesn't mean you have to memorize these, but it's helpful. You have to think about the functions. I think I've made that point. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this video. I hope that you learned something in there that you can apply to your own playing. If you enjoyed that and you want to work this way and really take your playing to the next level and skyrocket your fluency, we have a whole developing fluency course on Jazz Skills where we do all of this stuff on several tunes, as well as the whole members area with hundreds more lessons. Thanks a lot for watching. See you on the next one. Bye for now.